Imagine, for a moment, the sensation of reading this very sentence. You see shapes on a page or screen, hear the silent voice in your mind that gives them meaning, and remain subtly aware of your body and surroundings as you listen or read. All these vivid, intimate, and immediate experiences are part of what we call consciousness. Yet, for all its familiarity, consciousness remains one of the deepest enigmas in science and philosophy. We live at the center of our own conscious experience, but explaining what consciousness is and how it arises from the physical matter of the brain has challenged thinkers for millennia. The roots of inquiry into consciousness stretch back to the dawn of human reflection. Even in Neolithic and pre-literate societies, humans are believed to have wondered about the nature of their inner life, what it means to sense, to think, to feel. Over centuries, consciousness became a central issue, not only for philosophy but also for science. Yet, despite its importance, there is still no universal agreement on how to define consciousness. Different traditions and disciplines have approached it from various angles, resulting in a complex tapestry of definitions and distinctions. Etymologically, the word consciousness has evolved over time. Historically, it was linked to notions like cognition, recognition of one's own ego, and the capacity for self-reflection. Early philosophical treatments often conflated consciousness with the mind or even the soul, blurring lines that modern science now seeks to clarify. As centuries passed, scholars began to separate consciousness from related concepts such as mind, awareness, and even conscience, a word that, despite its similarity, refers more to moral judgment than to the experience of being. Today, many researchers agree that consciousness is a multifaceted phenomenon. Some describe it as the mind's ability to receive, process, and store information through sensory perception, reasoning, imagination, emotion, and memory. Others focus on the subjective aspect, what it is like to have an experience. Philosopher Thomas Nagel famously captured this with the phrase, "what it is like," pointing to the inner first-person quality that sets consciousness apart from mere information processing. It is one thing for a computer or a brain to register data. It is another entirely for there to be something it is like to be that system, to have a point of view. This distinction leads to one of the most persistent puzzles in the study of consciousness, the so-called explanatory gap. On one side, there are observable physical processes in the brain, neurons firing, chemicals exchanging, patterns of electrical activity. On the other, there is lived experience, the feeling of being alive and aware. Bridging the gap between these objective processes and the subjective world of experience is what philosophers and scientists have called the hard problem of consciousness. Why should any particular arrangement of matter in the brain give rise to experience at all? Why is there something it is like to see the color blue or to feel pain rather than nothing at all? Part of the challenge lies in the ambiguity of the very concept of consciousness. In scientific literature, distinctions are often drawn between different kinds of consciousness. Creature consciousness refers to whether an organism as a whole is conscious, whether it is awake and sentient as opposed to being asleep or in a coma. State consciousness considers the various states a being might be in, dreaming, alert, drowsy, or under anesthesia. There are also discussions of consciousness as an entity, the attempt to treat consciousness as a thing in itself, distinct from the body or brain. Adding to the complexity, consciousness is frequently conflated with related phenomena like awareness. While these terms are sometimes used interchangeably in everyday conversation, various researchers and philosophers have argued for important distinctions. One perspective suggests that consciousness can be seen as a general state of being, a baseline condition that allows for the presence of experience. Awareness, on the other hand, might be described as the capacity to focus on specific aspects of experience, to notice and interpret particular events, sensations, or thoughts. In this view, consciousness is the ocean in which awareness picks out the moving waves. Some propose that consciousness is a dualistic and embodied process. That is, it arises from the interaction of body and mind, while awareness might be described as non-dual and non-local, transcending simple physical boundaries. These distinctions, though subtle, open new avenues for scientific investigation and philosophical debate. For example, in studies of meditation in altered states, researchers have tried to separate the neural correlates of sheer awareness from those associated with the contents of consciousness. Despite centuries of scrutiny, consciousness retains its aura of mystery. The difficulty of measuring consciousness objectively only adds to the puzzle. Scientists can monitor brain activity and behavior, but they cannot directly observe someone else's experience. This reliance on subjective reports, the descriptions people give of their own inner lives, has led to ongoing debates about the limits of scientific inquiry into consciousness. Some thinkers have even questioned whether science will ever be able to fully explain why and how subjective experience arises. This skepticism is not universal. Some argue that, although we currently lack objective measures of consciousness, promising research directions are emerging. Modern neuroscience has begun to map the brain activity associated with various states of consciousness, such as waking, dreaming, anesthesia, and coma. Researchers also distinguish between conscious and unconscious brain functions, investigating how certain processes like vision, memory, and attention sometimes operate below the threshold of awareness and sometimes enter conscious experience. The problem, however, is not just technical. There is a philosophical dimension that stubbornly resists empirical resolution. The classic thought experiment of the philosophical zombie, a being that behaves exactly like a human but lacks any inner experience, illustrates the challenge. If such a creature is conceivable, then consciousness is not simply about function or behavior, but about something more elusive, the presence of subjective experience itself. This brings us back to the central question: what is the nature of consciousness? Some have suggested that consciousness is a complex, multidimensional phenomenon, sitting at the intersection of philosophy and neuroscience. It might encompass not only basic awareness but also self-reflection, free will, and moral judgment. Others focus more narrowly on the raw, subjective field that accompanies perception and thought. Still others emphasize the functional aspects, the ways in which consciousness enables flexible behavior, decision-making, and integration of sensory information. Yet, for all these theories, there remains a striking lack of consensus. The field is marked by ongoing debates and a proliferation of competing definitions. Some researchers hope that advances in brain imaging, computational modeling, and cross-disciplinary work will eventually yield answers. Others remain cautious, noting that the subjective nature of conscious experience may place it forever beyond the reach of objective, third-person science. As we consider the nature of consciousness, we find ourselves at the threshold of an enduring mystery. It is a mystery felt not just by philosophers and scientists, but by anyone who has ever wondered about the inner life of another being, or even their own. Why are we aware, and how does this awareness arise from the physical world? What distinguishes conscious states from unconscious ones, and how can we measure or describe something so deeply personal and elusive? These questions set the stage for further scientific investigation, inviting us to explore the unknown territory where brain, mind, and experience converge. The journey promises to challenge our assumptions, stretch the limits of our understanding, and perhaps, in time, bring us closer to unraveling the enigma at the heart of our own existence. Imagine standing in a bustling city square, sunlight glinting off shop windows, the aroma of roasted coffee drifting through the air, voices and footsteps swirling around you. In this moment, your brain is orchestrating a remarkable symphony, transforming light, sound, and scent into a vivid tapestry of conscious experience. But what, exactly, within the intricate landscape of the brain, gives rise to this theater of perception and self-awareness? Neuroscientists have spent decades mapping the mind's architecture, probing the neural networks and anatomical landmarks believed to underpin consciousness itself. At the heart of this exploration lies a striking realization. The brain is not a simple switchboard, but a dense web of interacting regions, each contributing to the mosaic of experience. The journey begins deep within the brain, in regions that, though hidden from view, are crucial for the very possibility of being conscious. Among these, the thalamus stands out as a central relay station, channeling sensory signals from the body to the cortex. When you see a flash of color or hear a distant siren, the signals first pass through the thalamus, which sorts and filters the incoming information. Scientific studies using invasive recordings have shown that when the thalamus is disrupted, conscious awareness itself can vanish, suggesting this structure is fundamental to the emergence of experience. Yet the thalamus does not work alone. It is intimately connected to the cerebral cortex, a sprawling sheet of tissue folded tightly upon itself, forming the brain's outer layer. Within the cortex, vast networks support everything from visual perception to memory, language, and abstract thought. The cortex is not uniform. Instead, it is divided into regions, each specialized for different tasks. For perception, the visual cortex at the back of the brain processes patterns of light, while the auditory cortex, nestled at the sides, interprets sound waves. But perception is more than passive reception. It is an active construction, shaped by memory, expectation, and attention. Memory, too, is woven deeply into the fabric of consciousness. Some researchers propose that consciousness itself evolved as part of the episodic memory system, allowing us to recall personal experiences and recombine them in new ways for planning and problem solving. This ability to reflect on the past, imagine the future, and weigh possibilities appears to set conscious thought apart from simpler forms of sensory processing. The hippocampus, a curved structure buried in the temporal lobe, is a key player in this process, helping to store and retrieve the episodes of our lives that color our conscious narrative. Self-awareness, the subtle sense of being a person with a unique perspective, draws on an even broader network. The prefrontal cortex, located just behind the forehead, is often implicated in self-reflection and decision-making. Damage to this region can disrupt a person's sense of agency or blur the boundaries between self and world. Another enigmatic structure, the claustrum, has been suggested as a possible conductor of conscious experience, though its precise role remains a subject of ongoing investigation. To unravel these mysteries, scientists have developed a toolkit of methods for peering into the living brain. Some, like electroencephalography, EEG, detect the faint electrical signals produced by neurons firing in synchrony. EEG's strength lies in its ability to capture rapid changes in brain activity from moment to moment, making it invaluable for studying the fleeting transitions between conscious and unconscious states. Other techniques, such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, offer a different window. By tracking changes in blood flow, fMRI shows which regions are most active when a person recognizes a face, solves a puzzle, or simply rests with eyes closed. Diffusion tensor imaging, or DTI, traces the pathways of white matter fibers connecting distant brain regions, revealing the routes along which information flows. More recently, researchers have begun to combine these approaches, using transcranial electrical stimulation, for example, to alter brain activity in targeted areas while monitoring the effects with EEG or functional magnetic resonance imaging. Each method comes with trade-offs. Some provide exquisite detail about timing, others about location, but none alone can capture the full richness of conscious experience. Despite these challenges, advances in neural imaging have dramatically expanded our understanding of brain connectivity and the networked nature of awareness. One of the most compelling insights to emerge from this work is the idea that consciousness depends on the integration and broadcasting of information across widespread brain networks. The default mode network, active when we are introspective or daydreaming, and the executive control network, engaged when we focus attention or make decisions, appear to play complementary roles. When consciousness is lost under anesthesia, for instance, or in deep sleep, the synergy between these networks breaks down. Information ceases to be shared broadly, and the unified sense of experience fades. This finding has led some to suggest that conscious awareness arises not from any single brain area, but from the dynamic interplay among many. The brain's architecture is, in a sense, a living record of both our evolutionary history and our personal development. Even before birth, the surrounding environment begins to sculpt the brain's structure, laying down the foundations for emotional and cognitive growth. As we mature, our experiences, what we see, hear, and feel, continue to shape the connections between regions. Perception of the world is not a passive process. Rather, it reflects the ongoing dialogue between external stimuli and the networks of the brain that interpret and give meaning to those signals. This becomes especially clear in studies of neuroarchitecture, the way our perception of surroundings can influence brain function. The design of a classroom or a hospital room, for example, may affect how easily we learn or recover, pointing to the intimate relationship between environment, perception, and conscious experience. Yet, for all the progress in mapping the mind's architecture, significant questions remain. Linking the complex web of neural circuits to the richness of conscious thought is an ongoing challenge, often referred to as the quest for the neural correlates of consciousness. Much of the research suggests that awareness is not evenly distributed across the cortex. Instead, certain regions serve as hubs where information is integrated and made available for conscious report. For instance, studies of patients with unilateral neglect who fail to notice one side of their visual field after brain injury have pinpointed areas involved in storing and accessing conscious visual images. When these regions are damaged, entire aspects of experience can disappear from awareness, even though the eyes and low-level sensory pathways remain intact. Brain imaging has also transformed the way we assess consciousness in patients who cannot communicate. By looking for patterns of brain activity in response to commands or stimuli, clinicians can sometimes detect signs of awareness in individuals previously thought to be entirely unresponsive. These discoveries raise profound ethical questions about the boundaries and indicators of consciousness, especially when traditional behavioral measures fall short. Ultimately, Scientists agree that the brain is the most complex organ known, and consciousness remains one of its most elusive products. The methods at our disposal. Positron emission tomography scans tracking chemical tracers, single photon emission computed tomography imaging measuring blood flow, magnetoencephalography recording magnetic fields, and more, offer glimpses into the bustling activity beneath the skull. Each advance in technology peels back another layer, revealing new patterns and networks. Yet, the subjective quality of conscious experience, the sense of being, of perceiving, remembering, and reflecting, continues to resist easy explanation. As we continue to chart the contours of the mind's architecture, each discovery brings us a little closer to understanding how the brain constructs the world we know. The journey is far from over, but the map is growing ever more detailed, promising fresh insights into the age-old mystery of consciousness. Imagine for a moment what it feels like to be awake in a world not just seeing or hearing, but knowing that you see, knowing that you hear. This sense of presence, of subjective experience, is what science calls consciousness. But how does the brain, a tangled web of neurons and electrical impulses, generate this inner light? In recent decades, neuroscientists have moved beyond simply mapping brain regions and have taken on the daunting task of building theories, formal, testable models that aim to explain how consciousness arises from brain activity. Among these, two theories have come to dominate both discussion and research: the global workspace theory and the integrated information theory. The global workspace theory, often referred to as GWT or GNWT, in its more recent neuronal form, uses a metaphor familiar to anyone who has set foot on a theater stage. In this view, the brain is alive with countless processes happening outside our awareness. Most are like stagehands working in the wings, invisible yet essential. Occasionally, certain information, a sudden pain, a flash of memory, the sound of one's name is selected and illuminated at center stage. This is consciousness, a process in which pieces of information become globally available to many different brain systems at once. According to GNWT, the key is not just the presence of information, but its broadcasting, or ignition. A sudden, widespread activation that integrates and amplifies selected signals so they can be reported, remembered, and acted upon. Support for the theory comes from studies showing that certain patterns of brain activity, such as synchronized firing across distant regions, tend to accompany conscious perception. GNWT highlights the importance of front-facing areas of the brain, particularly the frontal lobes, as crucial hubs in this global workspace. However, the theory does not claim that the workspace is limited to the frontal cortex. Research points to a complex interplay between prefrontal and posterior regions in orchestrating conscious access. The workspace is a network, not a single seat of the mind. Neuroimaging and electrophysiological studies provide empirical evidence for these dynamics, showing that conscious access coincides with a late and widespread burst of activity linking sensory, memory, and executive systems. In contrast, integrated information theory, or IIT, takes a more abstract route. Rather than focusing on specific brain regions or networks, it begins with a set of axioms, self-evident truths about the nature of conscious experience. According to IIT, consciousness is what it feels like to have a unified, structured experience. The theory then asks, what kind of physical systems could, in principle, generate such an experience? The answer lies in information. Not just any information, but information that is both highly integrated and highly differentiated. In other words, a conscious system must be able to combine many bits of information into a unified whole while also distinguishing between countless possible states. To quantify this, IIT introduces a mathematical measure called phi, designed to capture the degree of integrated information within a system. The higher the phi, the more conscious the system is presumed to be. According to IIT, consciousness is not tied to any particular brain region. Any network, biological or artificial, that exhibits high levels of integrated information could, in principle, be conscious. This broad claim has led some to speculate about the consciousness of animals or even complex machines. Still, the theory faces challenges, especially in grounding its mathematical formalism in empirical data. The scientific community has recognized the importance of directly comparing these theories, rather than letting them remain parallel and untested. A series of large-scale adversarial experiments were designed to put global neuronal workspace theory and integrated information theory head-to-head, with both camps agreeing on experimental design and predictions. In one landmark study, researchers presented participants with ambiguous visual stimuli while recording brain activity in fine detail. The goal was to determine whether conscious perception was better explained by the global broadcasting predicted by global neuronal workspace theory or by the patterns of integration and differentiation favored by integrated information theory. The results were illuminating, though not in the way either side had hoped. Both theories were challenged by the data. For instance, while global neuronal workspace theory predicts a sharp, late ignition of activity in the frontal and parietal cortices when a stimulus is consciously perceived, the experiment found that some conscious experiences did not align with this pattern. Similarly, integrated information theory's prediction that consciousness should correlate with hi-fi in certain brain areas was not decisively supported. Some findings suggested that sensory processing and conscious perception can occur even without the kinds of integration or workspace activation each theory considers essential. These inconclusive results have not dampened enthusiasm for theory-driven research. In fact, they highlight the importance of collaboration and open debate in the field. By directly pitting models against each other, researchers can refine their predictions and identify where the theories fall short. Such adversarial collaborations are a relatively new approach in consciousness science, but they signal a maturing discipline, one willing to subject its most cherished ideas to rigorous empirical scrutiny. Beyond global neuronal workspace theory and integrated information theory, the field is rich with competing models. Higher-order thought theory, for example, suggests that consciousness arises when the brain not only processes information, but also forms a higher-level representation that thinks about those processes. Reentry theory emphasizes recurrent loops of neural activity, while predictive processing models cast the brain as a prediction engine, constantly comparing incoming signals to its own expectations. Each of these theories addresses different aspects of the easy and hard problems of consciousness. The former focused on how the brain enables reportable awareness, the latter on why experience has a qualitative feel at all. The debate is far from academic alone. For example, understanding which brain regions or network properties are required for consciousness has clinical implications. Some historical arguments held that a functioning cerebral cortex was necessary for any kind of conscious experience, but recent work suggests a more nuanced story, with subcortical structures and network interactions also playing a role. What makes the study of consciousness uniquely challenging is that it sits at the crossroads of philosophy, mathematics, and empirical neuroscience. Integrated information theory impresses with its mathematical elegance and ambition. It offers a way to quantify consciousness and apply the measure to animals, machines, or even hypothetical systems. Yet critics point out that its empirical grounding remains limited. Global neuronal workspace theory, meanwhile, is supported by a growing body of neuroimaging and electrophysiological data, but faces questions about the specificity of its predictions and the true extent of the workspace within the brain. In public debates, proponents of each theory often highlight their model's strengths while acknowledging their limitations. Some argue that global neuronal workspace theory's emphasis on conscious access, the ability to report, remember, and plan based on experience, captures the functional core of what consciousness does. Others are drawn to integrated information theory's attempt to explain not just what consciousness does, but what it is, the very presence of experience itself. Theories are increasingly judged not only by their philosophical appeal, but by their ability to generate testable, falsifiable predictions. Recent years have seen a shift from simply identifying neural correlates of consciousness, the brain activity that accompanies awareness, to developing causal, mechanistic explanations. Researchers now design experiments that can rule out certain predictions, refine the metrics for measuring consciousness, and even propose hybrid models that blend elements of the global neuronal workspace theory, the integrated information theory, and other frameworks. Some suggest that future progress may depend on integrating these perspectives, creating a synergistic workspace that draws on the strengths of each approach. Despite intense debate, there is broad agreement on the importance of direct comparison and collaboration. As one review put it, comparing theories is not just an academic exercise, but a necessary step in making real progress. The adversarial experiments, even when they yield ambiguous results, help clarify where the field stands and where it must go next. In sum, the scientific theories of consciousness, from the spotlight of the global workspace to the mathematics of integrated information, reflect both the ambition and complexity of the quest itself. They are works in progress, shaped by evidence, debate, and a willingness to question even their own foundations. As experiments become more refined and theories more precise, the hope is that we will draw closer to understanding how the brain gives rise to the ineffable phenomenon of consciousness, or, at the very least, learn to ask better questions about the mystery within. On the ever-shifting frontier of consciousness research, questions have moved beyond how the brain produces subjective experience. Today, curiosity extends to what happens when consciousness is fundamentally altered, technologically extended, or even simulated in machines. This landscape is shaped by interdisciplinary teams: neuroscientists, psychologists, engineers, ethicists, each bringing unique perspectives to a phenomenon that resists easy explanation. Social neuroscience, a relatively new field, exemplifies this collaborative spirit, recognizing that consciousness cannot be understood in isolation but must be studied in relation to other minds, societies, and emerging technologies. One striking area of progress lies in the study of altered states of consciousness. These are not merely curiosities or deviations from a supposed norm. Rather, they represent a spectrum of ways in which conscious experience can be modulated. The concept of altered states encompasses a vast array of phenomena, from the effects of meditation and deep trance to the disorienting shifts brought on by psychedelics or anesthesia. Despite decades of research, there is still no strict consensus on how to define altered states, though most agree they involve changes in perception, sense of self, or awareness of time and space. Their history is as old as humanity itself, woven into religious rituals, shamanic practices, and cultural narratives across the globe. Modern research has shown that such states are not just esoteric curiosities, but can carry significant psychological and therapeutic value. For example, altered states have been used in pain management and stress reduction, sometimes with results that challenge conventional medical expectations. In clinical settings, these states may arise through hypnosis, guided imagery, or pharmacological interventions, offering relief where standard treatments fall short. On the cultural and social front, phenomena like spirit possession or after-death communication are interpreted in varying ways, sometimes as evidence of otherworldly realities, sometimes as expressions of deeply rooted psychological processes. Neurophysiological studies suggest that these experiences correspond to distinctive patterns of brain activity, yet the full relationship between brain, mind, and meaning remains elusive. The psychological effects of altered states can be profound. Some researchers note their association with enhanced creativity and their potential to induce lasting shifts in worldview or self-concept. Out-of-body experiences, for instance, are reported across cultures and can have a transformative impact on individuals' attitudes toward life and death. The use of psychedelics, once relegated to the fringe of scientific inquiry, is now being re-examined for its potential mental health benefits, prompting new questions about the boundaries and plasticity of consciousness itself. As we look to the future, perhaps the most provocative questions arise at the intersection of consciousness and technology. Artificial intelligence, once imagined only as a tool for automating repetitive tasks, now stands at the center of debates about the very nature of conscious experience. Scientists and philosophers alike are racing to define and understand consciousness, motivated not only by intellectual curiosity, but also by the practical and ethical risks posed by advances in artificial intelligence and neurotechnology. If machines can simulate processes once thought unique to biological minds, what does that tell us, if anything, about the requirements for consciousness? The debate over artificial consciousness is both technical and philosophical. Some artificial intelligence systems now exhibit behaviors that, on the surface, resemble those associated with consciousness, learning, adapting, even simulating attention and homeostasis. Yet there is a recognized dissociation between intelligence and consciousness. Intelligence in machines does not automatically entail the presence of subjective experience. Certain cognitive domains, such as self-awareness or the capacity for suffering, may be fundamentally unique to conscious systems, and there is no consensus on how, or even whether, these traits could be instantiated in silicon. A range of efforts now seeks to ground the search for artificial intelligence consciousness in empirical science. Drawing from neuroscientific theories, researchers are attempting to devise indicator properties, measurable features or behaviors that might signal consciousness in non-biological systems. Some approaches look for analogs to the neural integration or global broadcasting that characterize conscious states in humans and animals. Others attempt to simulate aspects like attention, but current models remain limited, and there is broad agreement that simulating surface-level processes is not equivalent to generating genuine consciousness. The lack of a shared theoretical framework complicates both the science and the ethics. Without reliable tests, questions about the moral status of advanced artificial intelligence remain largely in the realm of speculation. Recent years have also seen the emergence of debates about the potential for consciousness in brain organoids, tiny clumps of neural tissue grown in the laboratory. While these structures are crude compared to a human brain, their ability to exhibit spontaneous electrical activity has prompted concerns about the possibility, however remote, of generating some form of experience. Defining and detecting consciousness in such systems is a formidable challenge, and the ethical implications are considerable. If organoids were ever to display properties suggestive of experience, the protocols governing their creation and use would require urgent re-examination. Meanwhile, another technological frontier is rapidly advancing: the development of brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs. These devices establish direct channels of communication between a person's nervous system and external devices, bypassing traditional sensory and motor pathways. Initially developed to restore lost function in individuals with neurological injuries, brain-computer interfaces now enable some people to control computer cursors, robotic arms, or even speech synthesizers using only their thoughts. The progress is remarkable. For those who have lost the ability to move or speak, such technology can offer a new lease on agency and communication. The applications of brain-computer interfaces are steadily expanding. In clinical settings, they are used to treat a range of neurological disorders and to assist people with paralysis in regaining independence. Research groups are exploring portable and reliable systems with the goal of making these interventions widely accessible. Yet there are significant challenges: ensuring the accuracy and safety of the technology, understanding its long-term effects on brain function, and anticipating the broader implications for identity and selfhood. The integration of brain, machine, and mind raises a host of ethical questions. As brain-computer interfaces become more sophisticated, they blur the distinction between the biological and the technological, prompting reconsideration of what it means to be conscious, to act intentionally, or to be responsible for one's actions. These questions are not limited to medicine. They touch on legal, philosophical, and societal concerns that are only beginning to be addressed in policy and practice. Across all of these frontiers, the ethical dimension looms large. The urgency of developing a coherent, shared framework for consciousness research is now widely acknowledged, especially as artificial and technologically extended forms of consciousness move from speculative fiction to plausible reality. Without such a framework, society risks making decisions without adequate understanding, potentially granting or denying rights, protections, or personhood in ways that fail to align with the underlying science. These issues are not theoretical. In the realm of clinical care, for example, advances in detecting signs of awareness in unresponsive patients challenge long-standing assumptions about consciousness, personhood, and the obligations of care. Research ethics must grapple with questions of consent, the risks and benefits of new interventions, and the possibility of causing harm or distress to individuals who may possess some form of awareness but are unable to communicate. The field of consciousness research stands at a crossroads, shaped by new tools, new theories, and new ethical imperatives. The boundaries of who or what can be conscious are being redrawn, not only by discoveries in the laboratory, but by shifts in social values and legal norms. The implications reach far beyond the walls of neuroscience, touching on fundamental questions about identity, responsibility, and the future of human experience. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from this frontier is the necessity of humility. Despite dazzling technological advances and the promise of interdisciplinary collaboration, consciousness retains its mystery, a reminder that some questions may resist definitive answers even as our understanding deepens. As research continues, the hope is that we will not only gain new insights into the mechanisms of the mind, but also develop the wisdom to navigate the profound ethical and societal challenges that accompany this knowledge. The journey toward understanding consciousness is as much about expanding our sense of possibility as it is about solving a puzzle, inviting us to imagine new forms of being, relating, and knowing in a world transformed by science and technology.